Yes. Thank you, David, for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. This is going to be a session that's like a little bit of a war story on something that I did, a project that I did, where we had to document an API. And I thought it would be a good idea to make the documentation, so to speak, live, as in where you could use the examples right there. They could use the API right there on the web page, rather than having to go away and like open up a terminal and do curl and record authentication keys and all that stuff. So that's it. Let's get stuck in. So I'm a community engineer for Elastic. I basically do developer relations. I try to come up with useful stuff for Python, Ruby developers, and operations practitioners, and try to make their lives easier, basically. And it's quite cool. You can actually get paid to do that. So, for me, we're gonna do this talk in two parts. The first part is gonna be basically docs that I respect, and then the second part is gonna be what we did that I respect to some extent, but I was also part of making the sausage, right? So, the first thing to note, it's simple but really important. For me, good documentation starts with the API itself, right? So why do you have an API? It needs to have a reason for existing, and but believe it or not, not everyone actually thinks this through. They just think, oh, well, we should have an API so that developers, and that's it basically, developers. You need to be a bit more careful when defining the goals of your API. You need to be a bit more careful in defining your API. So you need to think carefully about things like what exactly do you want developers to do with this API, and what is it? Is it replacing a process? Is it replacing a paper process? Is it replacing a digital process? If so, are people going to be able to do the same things as they were able to do before? Because that will create certain expectations, and it means that your API has a more specific audience. So you need to take that into account. So in our case, this was the case, right? So we were replacing a whole bunch of XML as well as a large form that people could use. So to give a bit more background about the project itself, this is the directory, or is the directory of open access journals. It's a catalog, a venerable old catalog of open science journals and articles. So the way that they used to work before is they used to make publishers who would submit metadata to the DOAJ submit these large XML files that complied with the DOAJ custom XSD schema. And in order to make their jobs easier, they came up with this form. So I will, later on we're in the browser and we're actually showing you what we built. I'll show you this form briefly. It's 55 fields. I still remember the couple of weeks it took me to build this. This is to make, this was the evolution, right? This is what made their lives easier from what was there before. And so the API was basically the next step, right? The API was supposed to make this easier, as well as consolidate and replace a bunch of other minor processes that already existed for that project. So that's a more sentimental note. This is the first project that I led. I don't know how wise of an idea that was. I think I'd been in the industry, as in at least after leaving university, for about 3 years at the time. So I say this. There's two sides to this. One is if you push your luck, you can get pretty far, and maybe a little bit further if you look like me. But also, I want to encourage you to push your luck, right? You can totally pull off a project. Like just because you're like 2 or 3 years into the industry doesn't mean that you can't do something like this, that you can't be in charge of developing an API and like, you know, being in charge of something important for a customer. And of course, if your companies are a little bit wiser, then they might hold off, and or you might have a mentor. But ideally, you want to be pushing yourself. So I just want to put that message out there. So before we dive into the DOAJ itself, we're going to look at a few examples of docs that I really like. And so this is the first part where there's an opportunity for things to break. Okay. Complex operation. Hey, alright. So this is RecRes. RecRes is kind of a mocking resource, so you can pay them and they will produce fake data for your front end. So it's like to test your front ends, essentially. Like a very API driven. I mean, the whole thing is an API. There's nothing, you know, there's nothing else there. But the really cool thing about it is this. So as you can see, it's responsive. So the more I zoom in, this is how it looks like on my phone, by the way. So you can use this API portal on a phone. So like none of us have an excuse now, right? So here you go. You can see the requests. I've opened developer tools over there, and you can see the requests literally being issued. You can do updates, deletes. This is a great way to show the two things like I think are important here. One, the actual request is being issued. That's very important as a dev if you're looking at it and if you're wondering, like, am I doing the right thing? What should the request look like? What response should I expect? You're used to the dev tools. You can see it right there. The other thing is you see the schema, right? So what are the possible fields and what's the meaning of those fields? And you see them in practical examples rather than just in a kind of abstract, oh, this field is a string. This is an integer. You can actually see real data being returned. So that's RecRes. That's some kind of new service that somebody sent me on Twitter last week. They really like it. This one is a little bit older. This is NASA. So this is actually a bit of a relationship to the UK development community. It itself is very cool. So this is live, right? This is literally like a JS fiddle or a JS bin, and this is the API docs. Like that's the portal. You can literally they have this example preloaded. You can see pictures. You can see all the information that API returns, and they've given you a full example. I love this because it gives you a whole story. Right? It's not just this is a route from this API. This is what you could produce with this API, right? It really gives you an idea. So you can, and the fact that it's live is of course really cool. So.
Oh, is that today? The harvest moon?
Yeah, it's live, like right now. Yes. And there you go. That's my text that I just inserted. So the relationship with the UK development community here is that you see it's an embed, right? So this is something that you could use yourselves, and it's an embed of this thing called JS bin. I don't know how many of you know Remy Sharp in the JavaScript community. Ah, what a shame. Well, now you know Remy Sharp. He runs a conference called FFConf. It's an amazing event every year in Brighton. It's a really strong kind of community grassroots event. But it's front-end, right? It's JavaScript. That's his project. JS bin is his project. And NASA is using it. Like, how cool is that? So this I really like. So if you're thinking of building an API, an API portal, I would say that this is a good way to think about it. Often I find that people get stuck in certain patterns of thinking, like, it just needs to be dry, it just needs to describe every route, and then I'm done. Or it needs to be super good, and it needs to be perfect, and it needs to be this incredible demo. where you can use every single route, and it gives you rich examples, and it gives you tutorials, and there's everything, and then you don't have time to do that. I think this is really good if you're thinking of doing an API portal, and you know you are not going to have the time. Like, after all, this talk is titled for under-resourced teams. This is probably what I would go for today. Then there are two examples I have for you, which are, they're not interactive, so theoretically they're not live, but they are very, very good. So this is the DigitalOcean API. What I like about this one is, well, I just really like the way they put it into context. So you can scroll through, you can read the definitions of each field, so you can read something about each field. So that's your detailed documentation. But then as you scroll alongside it, you get the actionable parts, like the demo. So, and you can switch languages here. So this is directly in Ruby, in Go, and then in curl. Go away. Right. Okay. So I like, the thing I like here is this, how much context they managed to fit into one page. And they've done this in this unusual way where they've got large amounts of blank space, but I think that actually captures attention. So I quite like this visually. It goes from left to right. You've got the navigation in terms of the breakdown and the process of thinking that the user goes through. What do I need? Servers, droplets, okay. What I need, I want to list domains for my droplets. How do I do that? It's on the right. It's 1, 2, 3, left to right. So that I quite like. And then the final one I'm going to show you is Stripe. Everybody seems to love Stripe nowadays. So Stripe do payments, in case you didn't know. They're like the new hot thing in payments, or the old hot thing. So the thing I like about this is it's again kind of similar. You've got the nav, middle, and demo, and this is a good structure if you're going for like a proper portal. You know, you're working at maybe a bigger company, or your main thing is an API. It's just very important to you. Then this is a good structure to use, just underlining it from the DigitalOcean example. And again, you can change the language here, and that's also pretty cool. So here goes your normal curl examples, as well as many others, Python, Ruby, and so on. Now, obviously, you know, this takes quite a bit of work to do, so. So that's all very cool, but what did we do? Alright, so first, I'm going to show you I'm going to show you the end result, and then we're going to walk through the process, and I'm going to show you a little bit about the libraries that we used. Of course, Python, or Python. Alright, so this is the directory of open access journals. Just so you see what this was replacing. This is the 50 field form. Alright, so if you're a publisher, 58 fields now. I see it's expanded since I left. If you're a publisher and you want to submit, you want a journal to be considered for submission, this is what you have to fill out. This is a bit like becoming a British citizen, where you pay £1,300 to be considered for the privilege. It's literally like that. So the API that is, of course, going to solve all of the problems, or maybe not. This is what it looks like. So we managed to kind of convince Swagger that this whole thing is built on Swagger, including SwaggerJS for the front end, and Flask Swagger for the Python backend. The Swagger, in case you haven't heard of it, is kind of a framework, but more a framework of concepts that relates to how you describe an API. So there is a schema in Swagger, version schema, so that any language like Ruby or Python or Java could output a Swagger spec, and then that Swagger spec can be visualized by any front-end component that understands the Swagger spec. The Swagger spec that it produces looks like, that's not very pretty. decided to open the window. Right, that's what it looks like. All right. So you've got routes, so you've got paths like API applications, you got posts, you got deletes, gets, and so on and so forth. And inside you've got very predefined fields like name, description, and so on. All right, that part's fairly boring. Okay. So go back to. Right, so what else can you do here? You can, I'm just going to show you one example because we're running a little bit low on time. Article search. So scientific article search. So say I want the journal +1, I want articles from it. I can just say try it out, and I get a response back. So what I like about this whole thing is that you actually do have the schema here. So in case the response was missing something, because these objects are so enormous, not all the articles have all the information. So you actually do get the schema, you know what's an integer and what's Boolean and all of that. And you can try all of the parameters of the API, and you can see literally the concrete examples of what you're going to use. And you also see full response headers. I really like SwaggerJS for that. This is a very complete demo environment, essentially. And we did no work at all. Like there's even an so if you're authenticated, you can, so if you're a non-public user, which we have quite a lot of in the DOAJ, like publishers submitting data, you can put in your API key and the other parameters that you need directly here. So this demo works because it's JS, right? It works with whatever authentication you would typically provide the API. I think we might have to cut down on the questions.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. This is the whole show. Yeah, so this is that part. So the really cool thing about this is that we did a bunch of work on the Python end, and there were a few hiccups there, and I'll talk about them now. But really, there was not a lot of work that we did on the front end. In fact, even the red HTML is kind of all done on the Python end. We pretty much just had to say $SwaggerJS, and this is what we came up with. So this is an incredible time saver. If you are building a developer portal or like an API and you want good docs, I really recommend looking into SwaggerJS. Right, so how do you use SwaggerJS? Okay, so you So you need to produce that JSON that I showed you with like all the paths and name and description and so on. You just need to produce that somehow. It doesn't matter how, right? That's your interface between the front end and the back end. So the way we did it is we had this concept that we have our own data models, of course, like any system. We had, for example, the article class. So then it gets kind of hairy. We had this concept of data objects, which was a homebrew data access library. Always a good idea to do that, don't do that. Homebrew data access library, which was like the full enchilada, right? We were overriding get attr, we were doing various kinds of bits of Python magic in order to make it work. It was really hard to test. When it had a bug, it took a week. The proper experience of inventing your own data access, but I guess we needed it at the time, or at least we believed we did. So the data went from Elasticsearch into these data model objects, so all good. It went through this murky layer of data objects, and then the data objects have to transform it into a Swagger schema. So this is the bit that I was showing you, the JSON that I was showing you. And that then went through to an API layer, and that finally went to some decorated web routes. Okay, so it's Swagger all throughout. The web routes eventually all coalesce into Swagger.json, which describes them all. That goes into JavaScript. Alright, so a little bit on this part. So how exactly did we do this bit? Okay, so the one thing that I want to show you is screen for some reason. Because I make your life easier, I can make it harder. Swagger, there it is. Alright, so from our murky library, we did have to write something pretty dark. So when you see these words, a recursive function to translate a struct into another struct, then maybe it's time to rethink whether you really need to do this. But unfortunately, we had already committed to the design of data model, data object, Swagger coming out the other end of the meat grinder. So this is the bit that tied it together. Just so that you're aware, right, you are going to have to make this translation somehow. But we did manage to achieve it so that it's automatic. Right? There are a number of customizations along the way, but generally the attributes present in the model are translated relatively automatically to the final Swagger spec. So whatever is a string, whatever, if you add a field, it will appear. Right? This is the point. We don't have to waste our time maintaining. Right. So the important thing that we did there, and the way we actually used Swagger itself was like so. So this shows you how easy this app is to navigate. And what I need is to show you, in order that you can really get what we did, is the view. There you go. Because there's just so many layers that the data passes through, and by the end it comes out the other end. Yeah. Right, so there you go. So you've got search applications, you're searching journals, and there should be an article search here as well. Right, so here we go. This is the interesting bit for you. At Swag. This is how we actually use the library. So we had to fork the Swagger Flask library to add something really simple to it. And for this bit, I think I can show you. Gotcha. This should be just on the slides. Yes, okay. So do you remember how we had the route, right? We had the web route, and we had add swag, right? And this is going to be for that route. And then we say, this is the summary, right? This is an authenticated route. Here is where you search articles. The 16 lines, colorful lines that you saw, this is what this is for, in order to be able to display those. The rest of it works well with the existing Flask Swagger library. So this is what we did. I wrote this decorator. It's literally the simplest way you can use a decorator. You just add an attribute to the function object, so to each view function. So each view function gets a .summary and a .swag, which is the spec itself. And this is how we tied it together. From all of these murky details, it all went into .swag on the web route function itself. And this is the fork. This is all that we added. Right? If the attribute summary or description or the whole spec, if it's present on a web route, then produce it, like add it to the Swagger spec. That's it. Right? This is the only thing we did in the fork. So you can do, hopefully your applications are much cleaner on the inside than this one. So you will not have to go through all that trouble. But even if you do, it's really easy to use Flask Swagger. You put out you use that decorator, and you should be away. And you can use this little patch if necessary. I think they've already added this capability anyway, to be honest. So yeah, in summary, Swagger can look super complex. Can look like somebody mangled some XML into JSON form. But look, at the end of the day, I think it's a pretty good achievement when you look at that page. Considering how little effort we were actually doing other projects for other customers and for the same client, in addition to this one, and it worked out quite well in the end. Swagger is all still maintained. I checked before this talk. Flask Swagger is maintained. SwaggerJS is maintained. The Swagger spec is maintained. So yeah, I encourage you to go and check it out. And find me later for questions.